burnout, this is my addition, is total exhaustion. It is not your imagination. Sometimes I think we just want to say as homeschooling moms, I've just got to get my act together. Um, let's get it together. This, I just got to put it aside. But it really is like being in a tunnel, but unable to see the light at the end.
So what led to your most significant understanding of it?
So this was a situation I had in the fall of 1991. So it would have been our 7th year of homeschooling. The boys would have been like 12, 10, and Lizzie would have been 3. And so we started the morning like any other morning. I got a phone call that I usually didn't take phone calls during the school day. This is when we had normal phones and not cell phones. And so I picked up the phone, and it was my one friend from the State Department of Education. And she said, "Zan, are you sitting down?" I said, "Should I be?" And she said, "Yes." And so we had a situation. It's complicated. I don't want to spend too much time talking about it, where Joe and I had started a homeschooling association, the South Carolina Association of Independent Homeschools. We'll call it SCAES. It's a mouthful. In response to all the legislation and litigative problems we were having in South Carolina. And so we were, HSLDA, Mike Ferris and Dee Black were functioning as our attorneys. And we felt like we had a strong legal premise that this organization was based on. So a friend of ours, a friendly legislator, said, "Zan, let's just ask for an attorney general's opinion on this. If you get a positive opinion, your troubles at SCAES will be over." We were being sued by multiple school districts at this time. And
I was gonna ask the problem was lawsuits by school districts were being pointed directly at SCAES.
SCAES, yes.
Thank you. Okay, good.
And so the answer would have been a positive attorney general's opinion. And so she said, this friend of mine at the State Department said, "Zan, we got the Attorney General's opinion back today about SCAES, and it's negative. And the State Superintendent of Education has already um, sent out notices, or probably I would imagine a FedEx overnight notices to all local school superintendents saying anybody who is going through SCAES is illegal." And she said, "You're on the top of that list. You're on everybody's blacklist right now in South Carolina when it comes to education." And so I just remember thinking, I walked out of our schoolroom. We had an enclosed garage, and is where we kept all of our stuff, but we did do some schoolwork there. And I walked into my dining room, and I just remember putting my head down on my table. I just needed a minute to cry. And I thought, "Lord, I thought I was following you. Why do I keep ending up in these awful situations? Am I not hearing your voice?" And at the time I had been reading the book of Daniel, and I said, while I'm at it, let's talk about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, I wasn't going through all of this in my head, but I'll explain a little bit of the background to you. Most of you will know that it was when Nebuchadnezzar had come in from Babylon, and they were they defeated Jerusalem and Judah. And Daniel and his 3 friends were taken. They were kidnapped from their home, and they were taken and they were put in Nebuchadnezzar's elite school because they were noble, they were smart, they were good looking, all of those things. Talk about compulsory attendance. And so these 4 guys find themselves there. So they have hardship after hardship. First, they challenge the king's food and drink, and they win that challenge. In chapter 2, we see Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and if somebody can't tell him what the dream was and explain the dream, all the wise men in Babylon are going to be killed, and Daniel and his 3 friends were part of that. We know what happened. They all got together and prayed, and the Lord gave Daniel the dream and the interpretation. And so now in chapter 3, we see where Nebuchadnezzar had built a 90-foot statue of himself, or of a great god. I mean, he viewed himself as the god. And everybody who was anybody in the kingdom of Babylon was invited to come. And the instructions were, when the orchestra starts playing, everybody is to bow down and worship this statue. Well, we know what happened. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow down and worship. Well, there were some people in the kingdom who were really were so jealous that these three Jewish young men had been given so much authority in the kingdom, and then Daniel even more, that they couldn't wait to get back and tell Nebuchadnezzar, you know, these three men you appointed and gave all this authority to, they did not bow down and worship that statue. And so the king must have really liked them. I mean, there's no Fourth Amendment rights or privileges in Babylon. You know, life and death is in the hand of the dictator. And so he gives them one more chance. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you know, who is the God that can protect you? You need to bow down and worship me, or you're going into the fiery furnace. And they, you know, they make their famous statement, well, God can choose to save us or not save us, but we will never bow down and worship you. And so at that point, they make the fire so hot, 7 times hotter, that the men throwing Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are burned to death, just throwing the young men in there. And so now let me get back to myself crying at my desk. And I'm saying, and Lord, while I'm at it, what about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? You think you couldn't have just left them alone? I mean, they'd already been kidnapped. They'd already gone through all these trials in Babylon. And now you're going to throw them in the fiery furnace? Can't we all get a break here? And so I'm having my pity party. I'm crying. I'm thinking about all this in my head. And I happen to turn and look out my dining room window to the side, and a police car had just driven up. And the policemen got out, and they looked like angry policemen. They had their hands on their guns, and their faces, I can't describe it, were very taut and extreme. And I thought, do they know how little I am? They can just come and, knock on the door and take, are the dramatics really necessary? And so in that moment, I just had to run to the schoolroom, get Ty and John, tell Ty, take your brother and sister upstairs. Do what you need to do. Lock the bedroom door. I don't want Lizzie, my 3 or 4-year-old, seeing me handcuffed and put in a police car and taken away. And whatever you do, don't make a noise and don't come outside that room until you know that I'm gone. Then call Papa, my daddy. He's an attorney by trade. He'll know what to do. And so all of this is just happening in split seconds. And so, so that's sort of how Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego got pulled into my story. It was just during this one episode. And there was a verse that I read later, and I just want to read it to you because the verse says, here we go. Dear friends, don't be surprised when the fiery ordeal comes among you to test you as if something unusual were happening to you. And, I have to tell you, I've been a Christian for a long time, but Caleb, I'm still always surprised when the fiery ordeal happens to me. I can say every time we go through another trial, I'm surprised. And you would think I'd be at the stage in life in my faith where I would say, oh, this is a fiery ordeal that's come upon me to test me. I never think of that first. And so, here we are going through this situation. So I want to go back to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego for just a few minutes. They are thrown into that fiery furnace. They're bound. They didn't have time to take off their trousers. They're in, I would assume, flammable clothing because they had the robes, the free-flowing clothes, and they're thrown in. So don't you know, I mean, had that been me, maybe they had a whole lot more faith in me. Had that been me, I would have been expecting to meet my death, to meet God, but meet my death here on earth. And all of a sudden, they realize they landed in this fiery furnace and they're still alive. And it says they're no longer shackled. That means somebody had to break their shackles. It didn't happen on its own. And they look up and they see this fourth man that Nebuchadnezzar himself describes as looking like a son of the gods. But what we know, so I really studied this as I got away from this in my own personal situation. I mean, R.C. Sproul, Matthew Henry, Charles Spurgeon all agree that the fourth man was Jesus, not just an angel of the Lord, but this was Jesus come to meet with these three men. And so I've tried to really, in a sanctified way, imagine this scene. What did they do when they saw Jesus? It just makes me want to cry. Instead of being dead, they're seeing a risen Savior. I mean, this is an epiphany. I mean, they're seeing Him in the flesh, and He's talking to them. Don't you wonder what He said to them? Well done. Or, there's that old hymn, He walks with me and He talks with me and He tells me I am His own. And, what did Jesus say to them? I know this. I bet they were never the same after that experience with Christ. And, there's an old song by Rich Mullins that says, we're going to meet Him in the furnace long before we meet Him in the air. And, since then, I've always thought that just in the same way God built that fiery furnace, I mean, it was like He went to a lot of trouble not to leave them alone. And they're in this fiery furnace where they have their most intimate meeting with God this side of heaven that they'll ever have. And it was life changing for that. How did it change their life? That, it just, that that story just amazes me. I can't wait to see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in heaven and ask them all these questions. I can't wait to meet these guys. But I thought that is what Jesus does for us. Instead of leaving us alone and letting our lives go, just perfectly all the time, He introduces these things into our lives and builds these fiery furnaces for us so that we can meet Him in the same way, so that our trials are no longer, I mean, there's still fiery furnaces, but in them we meet Christ in a way that we've never met Him before. So I think my last part of the definition of burnout is we are burned out if we are in the fiery furnace and we don't see the fourth man. But when we see Jesus, when we see the fourth man amidst all of our trials, and we have that special fellowship with Him, then I think that is the thing as believers where we know God is with us, He's alive, Christ is walking with us, and He's telling us all the same things He told Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He walks with us and He talks with us and He tells us we are His own. And so, it was really that story that was life changing for me in terms of burnout and what it is and what it isn't.